What happened with the drummers? So there were three, I believe. One of them, I believe, broke their ankle. Broke their wrist. Okay, so one drummer broke their wrist before we could even get anything done. Another, he was up for doing it. I think he was unsure that he was the right drummer for the job. And then eventually we found Chris.
Chris was amazing. He could pretty much play whatever you wanted him to play. But the problem was he was touring with a band in May. So all he could manage was the cymbals for the songs. But in the end, he only managed to do 2 of the songs, which were Mabel and Circles. So those ones have some real elements of drums, which kind of pulls everything together in sort of realism and things. And he did a really great job in getting those cymbals really tight and sounding really in sync with the sequence drums.
When we were writing all the music, we were sequencing drums in Logic. So yeah, we'd be writing drum parts as we wrote the guitar parts, and then once everything was finished, we'd go back and make the drum parts actually playable, and we eventually used those as guide tracks to record the finished guitars.
After we did the demos with the Logic drums, which are somewhat lacking, I mean, if you spent a bit of time working on them, you could probably get them sounding good, but they're not. They're more of a writing tool in the way we saw them. So after we had the problems with the drummers, we needed to find a drum library that would fill our needs. And so how perfect can you get? One of the joint influences Periphery, their drums sound amazing, and lo and behold, they have a drum library. So yeah, that's where we came with Modern and Massive, and they've done some things with those drum libraries that just make everything sound that extra bit real. So using those drums allowed us to get closer to what it would have been if we had used Chris. And we actually based the stuff that we wrote in with the drums on what Chris was playing. So he learnt little sections of the songs, and we got him to just record sections so that we could copy his style, where he would put fills, ghost notes, that sort of thing. And that allowed us to, along with humanizing things by altering velocities and timing of certain notes so that it's not all like robotic, it allowed us to get closer to what it would have been if he had played. The scope of recording the vocals, it was a little bit overwhelming at times. I like to make charts of the parts that we've got to record. So I noticed when I was making this vocal chart that we had like over 400 vocal parts. And yeah, when I realised that, I knew this was going to be a bit of a challenge.
The layering in the vocals, all the different parts, it really brings these parts to life, because I knew what a lot of the melodies were going to be in the verses and in the choruses, but then hearing them with all the harmonies and hearing them with all the double tracks, it's something. It's much more than I expected it to be, and the style of Josh's voice is just fantastic, and you know, there's parts that are almost Africa by Toto, where it's just so many harmonies and melodies you can't pick which one you want to sing along to, because they're all so catchy, so recognisable. So yeah, it's the vocals really just brought the whole project to a new level.
We were trying to step away from typical metal aggressive screaming sort of vocals during our songs.
We're naturally focusing on the melodic stuff anyway, because that's how the guitars had been written, and we had melodies to go over a lot of the riffs already, so it just felt natural to just have singing rather than screaming. Obviously there are points where there's growls and shouts, but they're used appropriately, I think.
We really wanted to include these clean parts alongside the heavier parts, really contrast like the two extremes that we've been drawing from. And so to do that in a cohesive but impactful way, we wanted to make sure that each part stepped up if it needed to, and we found that the best way to do that was by adding more vocal parts. But we definitely tried to rein it in. Simon was invaluable for feedback, but I think in the end the mix has allowed things to really melt into the bed of the track and just become like a cohesive whole. After After a bit of discussion about where we wanted to head with the solos, Simon decided he wanted to take a step back from the solos and let me sort of construct the melodies and all that sort of thing. So
I don't write many solos for my own music. I've just never enjoyed it, so I never ended up writing any solos for this. Josh obviously wrote all the solos and recorded all of them, but it was good to be able to give feedback because the solos were written obviously during the pre-production stage, so it was good to say what worked, what didn't.
We really wanted to try and go for the sort of melodic sort of solo style, sort of similar to what you'd find in Alter Bridge, Tremonti, that sort of thing. Elements of that faster sort of almost shredding sort of thing, but not quite getting there, because I don't really find that the shredding sort of style captures the right feeling or fits the atmosphere of the song. So yeah, we just tried to focus on doing the most melodic, fitting with the vocal melodies sort of solo style.
Synth stuff, a lot of it was written during the pre-production. I find myself being quite familiar with sound effects that you'd hear in gent and other metal. I can always hear those sort of things that needed to be added when writing, so a lot of swells, a lot of cymbals rising into sections and reverse snares in breakdowns. We just tried to dot those around.
After kind of going back through the synth parts that we had for the pre-production after we'd recorded everything properly, I wanted to keep the same sort of sounds that we'd got, because we spent a little bit of time making sure that they all sounded right in the first place. So yeah, the same with the synths happened with the swells. So we did some pretty good cymbal swells and things like that for swelling into choruses and stuff for an added effect. For the beginning of the knife, we didn't want the drums and the guitar and the big heavy hitting intro to just come out of nowhere. We wanted there to be a bit of anticipation before that, a build up of tension, and so we thought we'd do a little bit of sound design using reversed guitars and use synthesizers and other effects to build that tension, and so it doesn't quite materialize into a chord or whatever until that first note and just massiveness hits in the knife.
So yeah, there's the chaotic section after the big metal breakdown bit of the knife has some very big orchestral drums in it, which we did have as we did use samples for that originally, and I think they are still there actually, right? But we wanted to, same with the normal drums, we just wanted to add an element of realism to it, so we came into the studio, we set up some, I think there was a bass drum and 2 toms either side of it, we had some mallets, and just sort of went to town, and I think we recorded each part about 4 or 5 times.
Layered all of those up to make sort of like a choir of drums, you might say. We wanted a driving force throughout that chaotic section of the knife, so that with all the feedback and horrible sounds that were coming on, there was actually some sort of thing driving it forwards, and it wasn't just complete chaos. I think what I was trying to achieve when we were mixing was the same sort of perceived epicness that I had gleaned from things that I'd listened to in the past, and that we were using as references for this. Obviously the Tremonti, Seven Dust producer, his mixes were definitely what I was aiming for when we were doing this. They're on the borderline between the hard rock sort of rawness and the metal precision, so I think our stuff fell into that category of it's not super fast, super technical, and so you can be a bit more heavy-handed with things such as like room reverb. It was a nice balance between the two elements, controlling those reverbs to make everything precise when it needed to be, but also letting it loose when we wanted it to just have a huge impact.
So when Josh was working on the mixes, obviously I was available for feedback. Obviously I knew the songs so well since I had a hand in writing them. I knew what they should sound like, what the influences that helped create these songs sounded like. But on the other hand, I did sort of leave Josh to. I very much trusted that he knew what he was doing. Like obviously he had a hand in writing the songs. He knew exactly what they should sound like also, and I think he did achieve that.
So one of the biggest challenges when mixing this stuff, especially because of all of the parts and like not just vocal parts, there are so many guitar parts, and it was quite a challenge to try and get them to all feel like they were one, that they came across as a cohesive whole, so that the listener wasn't thinking, oh, the vocals just sound like they're on top of these guitars, or these guitars are just doing their own thing while the vocals are doing their thing. We really wanted to make it gel together, and as well as writing that in, we needed to make sure that it was mixed in. So that was my job as the producer, to make sure everything was done such that each instrument had its own space. looking at the successes and pitfalls of this project, the first few months leading up to the end of the project probably went as well as they could go with the commitments that we both had for the other work that we were doing at the time. But as the project wore on, it started to fall behind schedule, and the final stages, which you could argue are probably the most important, the mastering definitely was a rushed process. I didn't have the time. I wanted to perfect everything. The fact that we got good recordings at source, we focused on not just settling for things. We wanted it to sound as good as it could do as we were recording. I think that made everything just so much easier later on, and it didn't actually need as much stuff as other things that I've mixed and mastered in the past that actually required.
It's hard to be objective, obviously, because I've heard it evolving from when the songs were not even songs, just little riffs. So, you know, when you hear a quite dodgy sounding demo and then hear it in its final form, I guess it sounds really good. Everything hits how it should. Everything's just been brought to life when everything's together, yeah.
3 years ago, I didn't really know anything about production. I've really tried to work on improving, learning everything that I need to learn, following others that obviously know more than me. So I think going from almost no knowledge to being able to produce something that almost stands up to the professional level, it does everything we want it to do, and it portrays the songs and the melodies and the ideas as we wanted them to be.
Yeah, so I'd say it's definitely almost up there with professional stuff. You know, it's got some ways to go, and I think if we were to do it again without any of the limitations that we encountered, we'd just do it so much better. And I think at that point we'd be there. It would sound as professional as we could possibly get it to be.